Look, I'm going to be straight with you from the jump. I should have listened to the warnings. Should have paid attention when every single person in that little town looked at us like we were walking into traffic with our eyes closed. But you know how it is when you're young and stupid and think you know better than everyone else. You roll your eyes at the locals with their weird superstitions and their helpful advice, and you keep on doing whatever the hell you were going to do anyway. Me and Jake moved to Millbrook Falls in late September, right when the leaves were starting to turn all those Instagram perfect colors that make you think you're living in some kind of fairy tale. We've been together for 3 years, and honestly, we were both pretty burned out from city life. Jake had been working himself to death at some tech startup that was probably going to fail anyway, and I'd been bouncing between retail jobs that barely paid enough to cover our shoebox apartment in Portland. When Jake's aunt died and left him this little house by the river, it felt like a sign, like the universe was telling us to slow down, breathe a little, maybe figure out what we actually wanted to do with our lives. The house was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom cottage with creaky floors and windows that didn't quite fit their frames. But it was ours, and it was free, and after years of throwing money at landlords, that felt like winning the lottery. The town itself was one of those places that time forgot. Population maybe 800 on a good day, with a main street that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. There was Murphy's General Store, which sold everything from groceries to fishing tackle, a tiny post office that was only open 3 days a week, and O'Malley's Tavern, where all the old-timers went to drink Budweiser and complain about the weather. We got the keys on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, I was already making plans. I'd always been into photography, nothing professional, just a hobby that I kept saying I'd turn into something more someday. The idea was simple: spend a year documenting small-town life, maybe put together a coffee table book, or start an Instagram account that people would actually want to follow. Jake thought it was a great idea, probably because it meant I'd be happy and occupied while he figured out his next career move. Our first trip to Murphy's was interesting, and I don't mean interesting in a good way. The bell above the door chimed when we walked in, and I swear every conversation in the place just stopped. Not gradually, like people finishing their sentences and then turning to look. I'm talking about a full-on record scratch moment where everyone went silent at the exact same time and stared at us like we just walked in wearing nothing but body paint. The store was bigger inside than it looked from the street, with narrow aisles packed floor to ceiling with everything you could possibly need. Canned goods, fishing gear, work boots, magazines, penny candy and glass jars behind a counter. It smelled like old wood and coffee and something else I couldn't quite place, something earthy and damp like wet leaves. Jake, being Jake, just smiled and nodded at people like nothing weird was happening. That's one of the things I loved about him. He could walk into any situation and somehow make everyone feel comfortable. Me? I was already feeling awkward and out of place, clutching my little shopping list and trying not to make eye contact with the locals who were still watching us like we were some kind of traveling circus act. We made it maybe halfway down the cereal aisle before this older woman, had to be in her 70s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, approached us. She had that look that certain old ladies get, like she'd appointed herself the unofficial mayor of everyone else's business. "You two the ones moving into the Henley place?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries like hello or welcome to town. "That's us," Jake said, still with that easy smile. "I'm Jake, this is Riley. We're really excited to be here." The woman, later we found out her name was Mrs. Kowalski, looked us up and down like she was trying to decide if we were worth her time. Her eyes lingered on me for a second longer, then felt comfortable, taking in my ripped jeans and band t-shirt and the camera hanging around my neck. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose someone should give you the rundown before you go getting yourselves into trouble." I felt Jake tense up beside me. Trouble? Mrs. Kowalski glanced around the store, and I noticed that the other customers had gone back to their shopping, but they were all listening. You could tell by the way they'd gone extra quiet, the way they were suddenly very interested in reading the labels on soup cans. "The river," she said, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound ominous. "You'll want to stay away from the river, especially at dawn and dusk. And especially you, young lady." She was looking directly at me now, and there was something in her eyes that made my skin crawl. Not hostility exactly, but something close to it. Like she was warning me about something she thought I was too stupid to understand. "Why?" I asked, because honestly, the whole thing was starting to tick me off. We'd been in town for exactly 1 day, and already some random old lady was telling me where I could and couldn't go. Mrs. Kowalski's mouth pressed into a thin line. "The River Wives," she said, like that explained everything. I looked at Jake, who looked just as confused as I felt. "I'm sorry, the what?" The river wives. This came from a different voice, a man who'd been pretending to shop for fishing lures near the back of the store. He was maybe 60, with a kind of deep tan that comes from spending your whole life working outdoors. Been there longer than any of us can remember. Longer than the town, even. Okay, I said slowly, but were they? The man and Mrs. Kowalski exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations that people have when they've known each other forever. Finally, the man shrugged. Women who wash clothes down by the river bend, he said. Every morning, just before sunrise. Been doing it for, hell, long as anyone can remember. So, I said, what's wrong with doing laundry? Mrs. Kowalski made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had contained any humor. Nothing wrong with it, dear. It's the talking that's the problem. The talking. They'll try to get you to help them, the man said. Ask you to hold something, or wring out a sheet, or just come a little closer to the water. Real polite about it, too. Sweet as pie. And you don't do it, Mrs. Kowalski added firmly. You don't talk to them, you don't help them, and you sure as hell don't get near that water when they're there. You see them, you turn around and go back the way you came. I felt Jake's hand touch my elbow, a gentle signal that maybe we should just nod and smile and get out of there. But I was young and stubborn, and the whole thing was so ridiculous that I couldn't help myself. What happens if you do talk to them? I asked. The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring. Mrs. Kowalski and the man looked at each other again, and this time I caught something in their expressions that made my stomach do a little flip. Fear. Real, genuine fear. People go missing, Mrs. Kowalski said finally. Young women, mostly. They go down to the river one day, and they just don't come back. Come on, I said, trying to laugh it off. You're telling me there are killer laundry ladies living in the river? Nobody laughed with me. In fact, the few other customers in the store had gone completely quiet again, and I could feel them all watching us. I'm telling you, Mrs. Kowalski said, her voice sharper now, to stay away from the river when they're there. I'm telling you to keep your distance and mind your own business. And I'm telling you that if you're smart, which I hope you are, despite appearances, you'll listen to what I'm saying. The despite appearances comment hit me like a slap. I felt my face get hot, and I was about to say something I'd probably regret when Jake's grip on my elbow tightened. We appreciate the advice, he said smoothly. Really? We're just here to live quietly and not bother anyone. Mrs. Kowalski studied him for a moment, then nodded. See that you do. She walked away without another word, and gradually the normal sounds of the store resumed. People went back to their conversations, the tension in the air slowly dissipated, and Jake and I finished our shopping in relative peace. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we just failed some kind of test. That night, lying in bed in our new house with its creaky floors and drafty windows, I brought it up. That was weird, right? I said. The whole River Wives thing. Jake was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, yeah, it was weird. You think they were serious? About people going missing? Another pause. I don't know. Maybe there have been accidents. People slip and fall, get caught in the current, and they blame it on laundry ghosts. Jake rolled over to face me. Even in the dark, I could see him smiling. People in small towns like their stories, Ree. It's probably just local folklore that got out of hand. I wanted to believe him. Hell, I did believe him, mostly. But there was something about the way Mrs. Kowalski had looked at me, the way everyone in that store had gone quiet, that stuck with me. It felt like more than just folklore. It felt like a warning. Besides, Jake added, pulling me closer, since when do you let random old ladies tell you what to do? He had a point. I'd never been the type to back down from anything, especially not because someone else thought I should. If anything, being told to stay away from something usually made me want to check it out even more. But as I drifted off to sleep that night, listening to the sound of water moving somewhere in the darkness outside our window, I couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Kowalski had said. About young women going missing. About the river wives, washing their clothes in the dawn light, always so polite when they asked for help. I should have listened. I should have stayed away. But I didn't. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I'd planned. The sun wasn't quite up yet, just that gray pre-dawn light that makes everything look washed out and strange. Jake was still asleep beside me, breathing deep and even, and for a moment I just lay there enjoying the quiet. Then I heard it, the sound of water moving, but not the gentle babbling of a stream. This was different, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone was splashing. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could and padded to the window. Our bedroom faced the back of the house, looking out over the overgrown garden and down toward the river. The water was maybe 100 yards away, hidden behind a line of willow trees that drooped their branches like curtains. But I could see movement through the gaps in the trees, pale shapes moving back and forth by the water's edge. My heart started beating a little faster. I grabbed my camera from the dresser. I got into the habit of keeping it close, just in case, and crept downstairs. The old floorboards protested under my feet, creaking and groaning like they were trying to wake the whole house, but Jake didn't stir. I slipped out the back door and into the garden. The morning air was cold and damp, full of that earthy smell that comes right before sunrise. Dew had settled on everything overnight, making the grass slick under my bare feet. I picked my way carefully through the overgrown flower beds, moving toward the line of willow trees. As I got closer, the splashing sounds became clearer, rhythmic, methodical, like someone beating clothes against rocks. I reached the trees and carefully parted the hanging branches, trying not to make any noise. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There were 4 of them, standing knee-deep in the river about 30 feet from where I was hiding. Women in long, dark dresses that clung to their legs in the water. They all had their hair covered with scarves or shawls, tied tight under their chins, and they were bent over wooden washboards, scrubbing clothes with slow, deliberate movements. It was exactly what Mrs. Kowalski and the man at the store had described, and somehow that made it even more unsettling. They were real. The river wives were actually real. I raised my camera, trying to get a good shot through the willow branches. The light was still pretty dim, but I thought I could get something usable. This was exactly the kind of local color I'd been hoping to document. I was lining up the shot when one of them spoke. Cold morning for picture taking. My blood turned to ice. The woman who'd spoken hadn't looked up from her washing, hadn't turned around, hadn't given any indication that she'd seen me. She just kept scrubbing whatever she was working on against the washboard, her movements steady and unhurried. I froze, camera still raised, not sure if I should answer or run or pretend I hadn't heard anything. Especially without shoes, another one added, and this time I saw her head turn slightly in my direction. Still couldn't see her face under the scarf, but I knew she was looking at me. I looked down at my bare feet, suddenly very aware of how cold and wet they were, how exposed I felt standing there in my pajamas with a camera in my hands like some kind of voyeur. "I'm sorry," I said, because it seemed like the thing to do. "I didn't mean to bother you. I was just taking pictures of the strange local women." The first one's voice was pleasant, almost amused. "Nothing wrong with that, dear. We've been photographed before, though usually not quite this early," the second one added. I should have left. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to back away, to go home, to forget I'd ever seen them. But they seemed so normal, so friendly, that I found myself stepping closer to the water's edge instead. "I'm documenting life in the town," I said. "Local traditions, that kind of thing. I hope that's okay." "Of course it's okay," the first woman said. "We're not shy." "Are we, ladies?" The other 3 murmured agreement, but they still didn't look up from their work. I could see now that they were washing different things, sheets, clothing, what looked like table linens. Everything was dark with water and soap, impossible to make out clearly in the dim light. "Would it be all right if I took some pictures?" I asked. "I could show you the shots afterward. Make sure you're comfortable with them before I use them for anything." "Such a polite young lady," one of them said, and there was something in her tone that made me feel suddenly self-conscious. "So considerate. Not like some of the others who've come around," another added. I raised the camera again, and this time none of them seemed to mind. I took several shots, trying to capture the scene, the early morning mist rising from the water, the women bent over their work, the old-fashioned washboards, and the way their long skirts floated around their legs. It wasn't until I was reviewing the shots on the camera's small screen that I noticed something odd. In every photo, the women's faces were somehow obscured, either turned away at just the right angle, or hidden in shadow, or blurred by the movement of the water. It was like they were deliberately avoiding being clearly photographed. "Having trouble with the focus?" the first woman asked, and I realized she'd been watching me frown at the camera. "A little," I admitted. "The light's still pretty low." "Why don't you come a bit closer?" she suggested. "The light's better near the water." I hesitated. Mrs. Kowalski's warning echoed in my head. "You don't talk to them, you don't help them, and you sure as hell don't get near that water when they're there." But these women seemed so harmless, so ordinary. They were just doing laundry, for crying out loud. What was the worst that could happen? I took a step closer to the water's edge. This town warned us to never speak to the riverwife part 2. The mud at the water's edge was cold and squishy between my toes, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on trying to get the perfect shot. The women continued their washing, seemingly unbothered by my presence, and honestly, it was kind of mesmerizing to watch. Their movements were so synchronized, so rhythmic. Dip the fabric in the water, lift it to the washboard, scrub in slow circles, rinse, repeat. It was like watching some ancient dance that had been passed down through generations. That's better, the first woman said when I was about 10 feet from the river's edge. The morning light hits the water just right from there. She was right, the photos I was getting now were much clearer. I could see the details in their clothing, the way the water rippled around their legs, the steam rising from their washboards. It was exactly the kind of authentic, documentary-style shot I'd been hoping for. You ladies do this every morning? I asked, still clicking away. Every morning for more years than you've been alive, dear, one of them replied. Her voice had a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Not southern, not midwestern, something older. Rain or shine, summer or winter. That's dedication, I said. Most people just throw everything in a washing machine these days. Machines don't get things properly clean, another woman said, her tone suggesting this was a conversation she'd had many times before. Not the way hand washing does. Machines are too gentle, too kind. Some stains need real work. I lowered my camera for a moment, squinting at what she was scrubbing. In the growing daylight, I could see that whatever she was working on was leaving dark streaks in the water, not soap suds, but something thicker, more viscous. What kind of stains? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The woman looked up for the first time since I'd arrived, and I got my first clear look at one of their faces. She was older than I'd expected, maybe 70 or 80, with skin that had the pale, soft look of someone who'd spent too much time in water. Her eyes were dark and deeply set, and when she smiled at me, I noticed her teeth were stained an odd brownish color. Oh, you know, she said pleasantly. The usual kinds. Blood, mostly. I felt my stomach do a little flip, but I forced myself to stay calm. She probably meant blood stains from butchering animals, or maybe someone had cut themselves and needed their clothes cleaned. That was normal, right? People in small towns probably dealt with that kind of thing all the time. From hunting? I asked. The woman's smile widened. Something like that. I was starting to feel distinctly uncomfortable, but I couldn't put my finger on why. The women were being friendly enough, answering my questions, letting me take pictures. But there was something in the way they spoke, something in their tone, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You're new in town, the first woman said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, we just moved into the Henley place yesterday. Well, my boyfriend and I did. The Henley place. One of them murmured, and the others made soft sounds of recognition. Haven't seen anyone in that house for months. Not since. She trailed off, but the other women nodded knowingly. Not since what? I asked. Nothing, dear, the first woman said quickly. Just hasn't been occupied in a while, that's all. Old houses need people in them. They start to feel lonely. I was about to ask what she meant when I heard Jake calling my name from somewhere behind me. His voice sounded worried, maybe even a little panicked. Riley, where are you? I turned toward the sound of his voice, suddenly realizing how far I'd wandered from the house. I'd been so focused on getting good shots that I hadn't paid attention to where I was going. I should get back, I said, lowering my camera. My boyfriend's looking for me. Of course, dear, the first woman said. But before you go, would you mind giving us a hand with something? This sheet is giving me trouble, and these old hands aren't what they used to be. She held up a length of fabric that was dripping with dark water. It looked heavy, waterlogged, and there was something about the way it hung limply from her hands that made my skin crawl. I really should go, I said, taking a step backward. Jake sounds worried. It'll just take a second, she insisted, and now all four women were looking at me directly. Just help me wring it out. You're young and strong. It would be nothing for you. Mrs. Kowalski's warning echoed in my head again. They'll try to get you to help them. Ask you to hold something, or wring out a sheet, or just come a little closer to the water. Riley. Jake's voice was closer now, more urgent. I really can't, I said, backing away more quickly. Maybe another time. The women's friendly expressions didn't change, but something shifted in the air around them. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, and the mist rising from the water grew thicker. "That's a pity," the first woman said, her voice still pleasant but somehow colder. "We so rarely get visitors who are willing to lend a hand, especially pretty young visitors," another added. I was almost back to the line of willow trees when the first woman called out again. "We'll see you again soon, Riley." I froze. I hadn't told them my name. I turned back toward the water, but the mist had grown so thick I could barely make out their shapes. They seemed farther away now, deeper in the river, though I was sure they'd been closer to the shore just moments before. "How did you?" I started to ask, but Jake's voice cut me off. "Riley, there you are. Jesus, you scared the hell out of me." He came crashing through the willow branches, still in his pajamas and barefoot like me. His hair was sticking up in all directions, and he looked like he'd just woken up. "I woke up and you were gone," he said, pulling me into a hug. I looked everywhere. "What are you doing down here?" I glanced back toward the river, but the mist was so thick now I couldn't see anything. No sign of the women, no sound of washing, nothing but the gentle babble of water moving over rocks. "I was taking pictures," I said weakly, "of the river wives." Jake pulled back to look at me, frowning. "The what?" "Riley, there's nobody here." I looked again, squinting through the mist. He was right. The river looked completely empty. No women, no washboards, no dark stains in the water. Just an ordinary stream on an ordinary morning. "They were here," I said. "I talked to them. I took pictures." Jake's frown deepened. "Riley, you're kind of freaking me out. It's barely 6 a.m., and you're standing by a river in your pajamas talking about seeing people who aren't there." I looked down at my camera, scrolling through the photos I'd taken. The early shots were the river, the mist, the morning light filtering through the trees. But the photos of the women, they were gone. Every single one. It was like I'd never taken them at all. "That's impossible," I whispered, frantically clicking through the images. "I took dozens of pictures. They were right here." Jake gently took the camera from my hands and looked at the display. Then he looked at me with the kind of expression you'd give someone who just told you they'd been abducted by aliens. There's nothing here. Just pictures of the river." I stared at him, my mind racing. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. The women had been real. I talked to them. They'd answered me. They'd known my name somehow. But the evidence was gone, and Jake was looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Come on," he said gently, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Let's get you back to the house. You're freezing." I let him lead me away from the river, but I kept looking back over my shoulder. The mist was already starting to clear as the sun rose higher, and I could see the water sparkling innocently in the growing light. No sign that anyone had ever been there. But I knew they had been. I knew it. Back at the house, Jake made coffee while I sat at the kitchen table, still in my damp pajamas, trying to make sense of what had happened. The photos were definitely gone, not deleted, just gone like they'd never existed in the first place. But I could still see the women clearly in my mind, their dark dresses, their covered hair, the way they'd moved in perfect synchronization. "You want to talk about it?" Jake asked, setting a mug in front of me. "You think I'm crazy," I said. "I think you're stressed," he replied, sitting down across from me. "We just made a huge life change, moved to a place where we don't know anyone, left behind everything familiar. Sometimes our brains play tricks on us when we're dealing with that kind of transition." He was being so reasonable, so logical. And maybe he was right. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the stress of the move, combined with Mrs. Kowalski's weird warnings, had made me see things that weren't there. But if that was true, how had they known my name? I didn't mention that part to Jake. I could tell he was already worried about me, and I didn't want to make it worse. Instead, I nodded and sipped my coffee and tried to convince myself that he was right. "I'm probably just tired," I said. "I didn't sleep very well last night." "New house, new sound," Jake agreed. "It'll take a while to get used to it." We spent the rest of the morning unpacking boxes and trying to make the cottage feel more like home. Jake had to drive into the next town over to set up internet service, so I had the afternoon to myself. I tried to work on organizing my photography equipment, but I kept finding myself looking out the window toward the river. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to walk into town. I told myself it was because we needed groceries, but really I wanted to ask someone about the river wives. Not Mrs. Kowalski. I wasn't ready for another lecture, but maybe someone else who might be willing to give me some straight answers. The afternoon was warm and sunny, Nothing like the misty, mysterious morning by the river. Millbrook Falls looked like a postcard in the golden light, quaint and peaceful and utterly normal. Kids were riding bikes on the sidewalks, someone was mowing their lawn, and the smell of barbecue drifted from a backyard somewhere. I was walking past the post office when I saw her, a woman about my age sitting on the front steps, scrolling through her phone. She had short blonde hair and was wearing paint-splattered overalls, and she looked like she might actually be willing to have a normal conversation. "Excuse me," I said, stopping in front of the steps. "I'm new in town, and I was wondering if I could ask you something." She looked up from her phone and smiled. "Sure. You're the one who moved into the Henley place, right?" "I'm Sarah Riley," I said. "And yeah, that's us. Word travels fast around here." Sarah laughed. "Faster than the speed of light. Everyone's been talking about the new couple. So what did you want to ask?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling stupid. But I'd come this far, so I might as well go through with it. "Have you ever heard of something called the River Wives?" Sarah's smile faded. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then patted the step beside her. "Sit down," she said. "Yeah, I've heard of them. Everyone around here has." I sat down gratefully. Finally, someone who didn't look at me like I was insane. "So they're real?" I asked. "Depends on what you mean by real," Sarah said carefully. "The stories are real. People have been telling them for as long as anyone can remember. But as for whether there are actually ghostly laundry ladies living in the river," she shrugged. "That's a matter of opinion." "What kind of stories?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, chewing on her lower lip like she was trying to decide how much to tell me. "Women who go missing," she said finally. "It's been happening for decades, maybe longer. Young women, usually newcomers to town, who go down to the river and just don't come back." My stomach dropped. "How many women?" "I don't know exact numbers. It's not like anyone keeps official records. But my grandmother used to tell stories about it happening when she was young, and her grandmother told her stories about it happening when she was young. It's like this town's oldest tradition, and people think the River Wives are responsible. Some people do. Others think it's just coincidence, women falling in, getting swept away by the current, that kind of thing. The river's deeper than it looks, and the current can be tricky." Sarah stood up and brushed off her overalls. "But I'll tell you what my grandmother told me. Stay away from the river at dawn and dusk. Don't go alone. And if you see women washing clothes, turn around and go home." "Why dawn and dusk specifically?" "That's when they're active," Sarah said, like it was obvious. "That's when people see them most often." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Riley, I know you probably think we're all crazy with our superstitions and our ghost stories. But this town has a way of getting to people, especially young women who don't listen to warnings." She left me sitting on the post office steps, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want to ask. How many women had gone missing? When was the last time it happened? And why did everyone seem to accept it as just a fact of life in Millbrook Falls? I walked home slowly, taking the long way around to avoid passing too close to the river. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I found myself checking over my shoulder every few steps. When I got back to the cottage, Jake was in the kitchen making dinner. He looked up when I came in, and I could tell from his expression that he'd been worrying about me. "How was town?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "Just picked up a few things." I didn't mention that I hadn't actually gone to the store, or that I'd spent the afternoon asking questions about missing women and river ghosts. Jake was already worried enough about my mental state without me adding fuel to the fire. We ate dinner and watched Netflix and went to bed early, just like a normal couple in their normal new house. But as I lay there listening to Jake's steady breathing, I couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah had told me. Women who went missing. Dawn and dusk. Don't listen to warnings. And most disturbing of all, the way everyone in town seemed to accept it as inevitable. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, I was being woken up by the sound of singing. It was still dark outside, that deep darkness that comes just before dawn. The singing was faint but clear, women's voices harmonizing in a melody I didn't recognize. It was beautiful and haunting and completely out of place in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m. I slipped out of bed and went to the window. Through the willow trees, I could see lights moving by the river. Not electric lights, something softer, warmer, like candles or lanterns. The singing continued, rising and falling in waves, and I found myself getting dressed without really thinking about it. I grabbed my camera and headed for the door. I knew I should wake Jake. I knew I should stay inside. I knew I was doing exactly what Sarah had warned me not to do. But the singing was so beautiful, and the lights were so mysterious, and I was 25 years old and convinced that nothing really bad could happen to someone like me. I was wrong about that. So very, very wrong. This town warned us to never speak to the Riverwide Part 3. The singing got louder as I approached the river, and I realized there were more voices than I'd initially thought. Not 4 women like I'd seen the morning before, but maybe 8 or 10, all harmonizing in this haunting melody that seemed to wrap around me like fog. The lights I'd seen from the window turned out to be lanterns, old-fashioned oil lanterns that cast flickering shadows on the water. They were hanging from the willow branches, swaying gently in the pre-dawn breeze, and their warm glow made the whole scene look like something out of a fairy tale. The women were there too, but there were definitely more of them now. They stood in a rough circle in the shallow water near the riverbank, their long skirts floating around their legs like dark flowers. Some held washboards, others had bundles of wet fabric, and they were all singing while they worked. It was mesmerizing. I raised my camera without even thinking about it, trying to capture the ethereal beauty of the scene. The singing, the lights, the way the mist rose from the water, it was like stepping into another world. She came back, one of them said, and the singing stopped so abruptly it made my ears ring. They were all looking at me now, their faces still hidden in shadow despite the lantern light. I felt exposed standing there on the bank, like I was interrupting something private and sacred. I heard the singing. I said, my voice coming out quieter than I'd intended. It was beautiful. We hoped you would, another woman said. Her voice was different from the ones I'd heard yesterday, younger, maybe with a slight accent I couldn't place. We've been practicing. Practicing for what? For you, she said simply. That should have been my cue to leave. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to back away, to run, to get as far from the river as possible. But there was something hypnotic about the scene, something that made it hard to think clearly. Would you like to join us? The first woman asked. We could use another voice. I found myself taking a step closer to the water's edge. I'm not really much of a singer. Everyone can sing, she said gently. It's just a matter of finding the right song. The water looked different than it had the day before, darker, somehow, and perfectly still despite the current that should have been flowing through it. The lantern light reflected off the surface like oil, creating patterns that seemed to shift and move on their own. What are you washing? I asked because I needed to say something, and that was the first question that came to mind. Wedding dresses, one of them replied, lifting a length of white fabric from the water. In the flickering light, it looked more gray than white, and there were dark stains spreading through the material. So many wedding dresses. Why wedding dresses? The woman who'd spoken first laughed, a sound like water trickling over stones. Because that's what they were wearing when they came to us, dear. Young brides, full of hope and dreams and plans for the future. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn air. Came to you how? The same way you did, she said. Curious. Drawn by the singing, by the lights, by stories they'd heard. They wanted to see for themselves what all the fuss was about. I was backing away now, but slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. The women hadn't moved from their circle in the water, but somehow they seemed closer than they had been just moments before. What happened to them? I asked. They joined us, another woman said, and now I could see her face clearly in the lantern light. She was young, maybe even younger than me, with pale skin and dark hair that hung in wet tendrils around her shoulders. But her eyes were wrong, somehow. Too dark, too deep, like looking into a well at midnight. They're still here, the young woman continued. Would you like to meet them? More figures began emerging from the deeper water, moving slowly toward the circle of lantern light. These were different from the others. Their dresses were white instead of dark, though stained and tattered from long immersion. Their hair hung loose and streaming, and they moved with the fluid grace of people who'd learned to breathe underwater. I recognized one of them immediately, though it took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. It was the girl from the missing person flyer I'd seen tacked to the bulletin board outside Murphy's General Store. Emma Walsh, that was it. She'd been missing for 3 months, according to the date on the flyer. Except she wasn't missing anymore. She was right there in the river, her wedding dress clinging to her pale body, her dark hair floating around her face like seaweed. When she saw me looking at her, she smiled, and I saw that her teeth had turned the same brownish color as the older women's. Don't be afraid, Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the water despite the fact that she was 20 feet away. It doesn't hurt. Not after the first few minutes. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up completely. All I could do was stand there and stare as more figures emerged from the water, young women in wedding dresses, all of them with that same pale, waterlogged appearance, all of them smiling at me with those horrible stained teeth. You see, the first woman said, her voice warm and conversational. They're happy here. No more worries about money or jobs or disappointing their families. No more wondering if their husbands really love them or if they're just settling. Just peace and purpose and sisterhood. I need to go, I managed to whisper. Of course you do, she said understandingly. That's what they all say at first. But you'll be back. They always come back. No, I said louder this time. No, I won't. I turned and ran, crashing through the willow branches and stumbling over the uneven ground. Behind me, I could hear laughter, not cruel or mocking, but genuinely amused, like they found my panic charming. I burst through the back door of the cottage and slammed it behind me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Jake was still asleep upstairs, and for a moment I considered waking him up, telling him everything, begging him to pack up and leave town immediately. But what would I say? That I'd seen a bunch of dead women in wedding dresses singing by the river? That one of them was a girl who'd gone missing 3 months ago? He already thought I was having some kind of breakdown. This would just confirm it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to process what I'd seen. It couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, maybe caused by stress or lack of sleep or, I don't know, gas leaks or something. People didn't come back from the dead to do laundry in rivers. That wasn't how the world worked. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the image of Emma Walsh standing in the water, her wedding dress clinging to her pale body, smiling at me with those stained teeth. I must have fallen asleep at the table, because the next thing I knew, Jake was shaking my shoulder gently. Riley, what are you doing down here? I looked up at him, blinking in the morning sunlight that was streaming through the kitchen windows. My neck was stiff from sleeping in the chair, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on pennies. I couldn't sleep, I said. I came down to make some tea, and I guess I dozed off. Jake frowned at me, taking in my appearance. I was still wearing the clothes I'd thrown on in the middle of the night, and I could smell river water on them, that damp, earthy scent that seemed to cling to everything down by the water. You sure you're okay? He asked. You've been acting kind of strange since we moved here. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. But I wasn't fine, and over the next few days, it became harder and harder to pretend otherwise. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen by the river. The singing haunted my dreams, and during the day, I found myself checking the missing person flyers around town, trying to match faces to the figures I'd seen in the water. There were more flyers than I'd initially noticed, dozens of them, dating back years. Young women, mostly, all of them described as having gone missing in the area. Some had last been seen near the river. Others had simply vanished from their homes or hotels or campsites, leaving behind all their belongings. I started carrying a notebook, writing down names and dates, trying to find patterns. Most of the disappearances happened in spring and summer, when the weather was warm enough for people to spend time near the water. Most of the missing women were between 20 and 30 years old, and most of them were described as being new to the area or visiting town, like me. Jake noticed my obsession, of course. It's hard to hide the fact that you're researching missing persons when you're surrounded by photocopied flyers and scribbled notes. He tried to be understanding at first, suggesting that maybe I was just processing the stress of the move by focusing on something concrete and research-based. But when I started talking about the women I'd seen in the river, his patience ran out. Riley, you need to hear yourself, he said one evening after I'd spent the afternoon at the library, going through old newspaper archives. You're talking about seeing dead people. You're obsessing over missing person cases from decades ago. This isn't healthy. What if they're not dead? I asked. What if they're being held somewhere, and everyone just assumes they drowned or left town? Held where? By who? The river wives. The way he said it, with that patronizing tone people use when they're talking to someone they think is losing their mind, made me want to scream. You don't believe me, I said. I believe that you think you saw something, Jake said carefully. But I also think you're under a lot of stress, and sometimes our brains can play tricks on us when we're dealing with big life changes. It was the same reasonable, logical response he'd given me before. And maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something real happening in this town, something dangerous that everyone was either ignoring or covering up. That night, I lay in bed listening to Jake's steady breathing and waiting for the singing to start again. But the night was quiet except for the usual sounds, wind in the trees, water moving over rocks, the occasional hoot of an owl. I must have dozed off because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of Jake moving around downstairs. I checked my phone. It was almost 10 a.m., later than I'd slept since we'd moved to Millbrook Falls. I got dressed and went downstairs, expecting to find Jake in the kitchen making breakfast. Instead, I found a note on the counter. Gone to town for groceries. Back around noon. Try to relax today. Maybe take some photos of something other than missing person flyers. Love you, Jay. I crumpled up the note, annoyed by his tone even in writing. He was treating me like I was fragile, like I needed to be managed and handled carefully. Maybe I was acting obsessive, but I had good reason to be. I made coffee and toast and tried to think about what to do with my day. Jake was right about one thing. I had been neglecting my photography project. I'd come here to document small-town life, not to investigate conspiracy theories about supernatural laundry ladies. I grabbed my camera and decided to take a walk through town, looking for the kind of wholesome, picturesque shots that would make good content for my portfolio. Main Street in the morning light, kids playing in the park, old men sitting on benches and talking about the weather, normal stuff that had nothing to do with missing women or river ghosts. I was walking past the town square when I saw her, Sarah, the woman I'd talked to outside the post office. She was sitting on a bench near the war memorial, reading a book and eating what looked like a homemade sandwich. "Hey," I said, walking over to her. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up and smiled, though I noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sure. How are you settling in?" "It's been interesting," I said, sitting down beside her. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah's smile faded slightly. "About the river wives again. About the missing women. You said your grandmother told you stories, but I've been looking at the flyers around town, and it seems like it's still happening. Women are still disappearing." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her sandwich like it contained the answers to all of life's mysteries. "My sister," she said finally. "Rebecca. She disappeared 5 years ago." I felt my stomach drop. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Not many people talk about it," Sarah said. "She was visiting from college, just here for the weekend. Went for a walk one morning and never came back. They found her car parked near the river trail, but no sign of her." "What do you think happened?" Sarah looked at me directly for the first time since I'd sat down. "I think she saw something she shouldn't have seen. And I think the same thing might happen to you if you don't stop asking questions and stay away from that river." Before I could respond, she stood up and walked away, leaving me alone on the bench with a dozen new questions and no one willing to answer them. That afternoon, I found myself back at the library, this time looking through local records instead of missing person reports. Birth certificates, death certificates, property records, anything that might give me more information about the history of Millbrook Falls and the river that ran through it. What I found made my blood run cold. The disappearances had been happening for over 100 years. Women's names appeared in birth records and marriage licenses, but never in death certificates. They just stopped existing in the official record, as if they'd never been born at all. And in the margins of some of the older documents, I found handwritten notes that made my skin crawl. Taken by the River Wives, 1923. Another one lost to the Washing Women, 1931. They're getting bolder, 1945. The most recent note was from just 3 years ago. Emma Walsh should have warned her not to go alone. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't notice Mrs. Kowalski approaching until she was standing right beside my table. "Finding what you're looking for, dear?" she asked, her voice deceptively pleasant. I looked up at her, my heart hammering. "Just doing some research on local history." "I can see that," she said, glancing at the documents spread across the table. "Lot of tragedy in these old records. Lot of young women who made poor choices." "Poor choices?" Mrs. Kowalski pulled out the chair across from me and sat down uninvited. "Going places they shouldn't go. Talking to people they shouldn't talk to. Ignoring advice from folks who've lived here their whole lives." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You remind me of my great-niece, Sarah's sister. Rebecca was her name. Pretty girl, smart as a whip, studying journalism up at the State University. She came to visit one summer, full of questions about local folklore and old stories. My mouth went dry. What happened to her? Same thing that happens to all curious young women who don't listen to warnings, Mrs. Kowalski said. She went looking for answers she wasn't ready to find. She stood up and gathered the documents I've been reading, stacking them neatly in front of me. Take my advice, dear, she said. Pack up your things, take your young man, and find somewhere else to play house. This town isn't meant for people like you. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone with the records and a growing certainty that I was in more danger than I'd realized. That night, I tried to convince Jake that we should leave Millbrook Falls. We haven't even been here a week, he said, not looking up from his laptop. Moving is expensive, Riley. We can't just pack up and run away every time you get spooked by local gossip. It's not gossip, I said. Women are disappearing here, Jake. They have been for over a century. People disappear everywhere, he said dismissively. It's not evidence of some supernatural conspiracy. I wanted to tell him about the documents I'd found, about Mrs. Kowalski's warning, about the certainty I felt that something was hunting young women in this town. But I could see in his expression that he'd already made up his mind. I was being irrational, paranoid, possibly mentally ill. So I didn't argue. I just went to bed and lay awake listening to the sound of water moving in the darkness, wondering how many other women had lain in beds just like this one, feeling the same creeping dread, knowing that something was coming for them. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The singing started just after midnight. The singing was different this time. Louder, more insistent, and underneath the melody, I could hear something else, voices calling my name. Riley, Riley, come down to the water, Riley. I sat up in bed, my heart already racing. Beside me, Jake was sleeping soundly, completely oblivious to the haunting chorus drifting through our bedroom window. I shook his shoulder gently. Jake, I whispered. Jake, wake up. Do you hear that? He mumbled something incoherent and rolled over, pulling the pillow over his head. I shook him harder. Jake, please. They're calling my name. Go back to sleep, he muttered, his voice muffled by the pillow. It's just the wind. But it wasn't the wind, and we both knew it. The voices were clear and distinct, harmonizing in that same ethereal melody I'd heard before, but now with words woven through the music. Riley, sweet Riley, don't keep us waiting. Come down to the water, your sisters are waiting. I got out of bed and went to the window. The river was glowing with that same warm lantern light, and I could see figures moving in the water. More than before, dozens of them, forming a semicircle near the bank where I'd been standing just days ago. They were all looking up at the house, all looking directly at me. We have something to show you, one of them called, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. Something you need to see. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stay inside, to wake Jake up properly, to call the police or pack our bags and drive away immediately. But there was something compelling about their voices, something that made it hard to think clearly. I found myself getting dressed, moving quietly so I wouldn't wake Jake. I grabbed my camera out of habit, though I knew from experience that whatever I photographed down there wouldn't show up in the images later. The night air was warm and still, heavy with the scent of river water and something else, something floral and sweet, like rotting flowers. The singing grew louder as I approached the willow trees, and I could see the lantern swaying gently in the breeze, casting dancing shadows on the water. There were so many of them now. Women in wedding dresses stood shoulder to shoulder in the shallow water, their pale faces turned toward me expectantly. Behind them, in the deeper water, I could see the older women, the original river wives, holding their washboards and watching with dark, knowing eyes. There she is, one of the brides said, clapping her hands together with delight. We've been waiting so long for you to join us, Riley. I stopped at the water's edge, close enough to see the details of their faces in the lantern light. Some were young, some were older, but they all had that same waterlogged appearance. Pale skin, dark stained teeth, hair that moved like seaweed even when there was no current. Join you for what? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The ceremony, another bride said. We can't start without you. What ceremony? Emma Walsh stepped forward from the group, her wedding dress trailing in the water behind her. Up close, I could see that the dress had once been beautiful, intricate lacework, delicate beadwork, a long train that must have cost thousands of dollars. Now it was stained and tattered, the white silk turned gray-green from months in the river. Your wedding ceremony, Emma said, smiling that horrible stained smile. Every bride needs her sisters with her on her special day. I'm not getting married. I said, taking a step backward. Not yet, one of the older women said, moving closer to the shore. But you will be. To the river, to us, to this place. It's a beautiful ceremony, really. Very traditional. She held up something in her hands, a wedding dress, pristine white silk that seemed to glow in the lantern light. It was the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen, with sweetheart neckline and sleeves made of delicate lace. We made it special for you, the woman continued. Washed it clean, pressed out all the wrinkles. It'll fit you perfectly. I stared at the dress, and for a moment I could almost see myself wearing it, walking down some invisible aisle toward... What altar were they imagining? I don't understand, I said. You will, Emma said gently. Once you're in the water, everything becomes clear. All your worries disappear, all your fears wash away. No more wondering if you're making the right choices, no more stress about money or careers or whether your boyfriend really loves you. She gestured toward the other brides, who were all nodding encouragingly. Look at us, Emma continued. We're happy here. We're free. No more expectations from our families, no more pressure to be perfect, no more disappointment when things don't work out the way we planned. But you're dead, I said, the words coming out harsher than I'd intended. The brides laughed, not maliciously, but with genuine amusement, like I'd made a silly joke. Dead, Emma said. Riley, do we look dead to you? We're more alive than we ever were on land. Here, we have purpose. We have sisters who understand us. We have work that matters. What work? Cleaning, one of the older women said. Washing away the stains of the world above. The blood, the tears, the sweat of disappointment. We make things clean again, pure again. She lifted her washboard, and I could see that it was covered in dark, viscous liquid that definitely wasn't soap. But first, the woman continued, you have to put on the dress. You have to join us properly. You can't be a river wife if you're not dressed for the occasion. The dress was closer now, somehow. I didn't remember the woman moving, but she was standing at the very edge of the water, holding the gown out toward me. Just put it on, she said softly. Trust us. We're your sisters now. I reached out toward the dress, my fingers almost touching the delicate fabric. It was so beautiful, and I was so tired of fighting, so tired of being afraid and paranoid and alone in my fears. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was better than the uncertainty of real life, the constant worry about money and jobs and whether Jake and I were going to make it as a couple. Maybe drowning in a river wasn't the worst way to go. If it meant joining this sisterhood of women who understood what it felt like to be lost and overwhelmed. My fingers brushed against the silk, and it felt warm, almost alive. That's when I heard Jake shouting my name from somewhere behind me. Riley, Riley, what the hell are you doing? The spell broke. I jerked my hand back from the dress and spun around to see Jake crashing through the willow branches, still in his pajamas, his hair wild with sleep. He looked terrified. Riley, get away from the water, he yelled. No. The river wives hissed in unison, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. The warm, inviting atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by something cold and malevolent. He can't see us, Emma said, her friendly expression twisting into something cruel. He can't see anything. But he can still lose you. Riley. Jake was at my side now, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me away from the water. What are you doing? You're standing in the river. I looked down and gasped. He was right. I was standing ankle deep in the cold water, though I didn't remember wading in. The current was stronger than it looked, tugging at my legs, trying to pull me deeper. I started to say, but I couldn't finish the sentence. How could I explain what I'd been seeing, what I'd been feeling? We need to get you out of here, Jake said, his voice tight with panic. Right now. He tried to pull me toward the shore, but my feet seemed to be stuck in the muddy bottom. The harder I tried to move, the deeper I sank. She belongs to us now, one of the older women said, though I could tell Jake couldn't hear her. She put her hands in our water. She touched our dress. She's ours. The wedding dress was floating on the surface of the water now, the white silk billowing around me like a net. Wherever it touched my skin, I felt a spreading numbness, a cold that went deeper than temperature. Jake, I said, my voice coming out weak and distant. I can't move my legs. He waded deeper into the water, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling with all his strength. For a moment, I thought it might work. I felt my feet start to come free from the mud. Then the hands grabbed me. Cold, waterlogged fingers wrapped around my ankles, my calves, my thighs. I looked down and saw faces in the water, dozens of them, pale and bloated, their mouths open in silent screams. The missing women, the ones who hadn't made it to the ceremony, who had fought back and been pulled under before they could join the sisterhood. They were trying to drag me down with them. "Don't let them take me," I gasped, clinging to Jake's arms. "Please, don't let them take me." "I won't," he said fiercely. "I won't let go." But the hands were strong, and there were so many of them. I felt myself being pulled deeper, the water rising from my ankles to my knees to my waist. Jake was pulled in with me, his face white with terror as he realized what was happening. "This isn't real," he kept saying. "This can't be real." The river wives were laughing now, a sound like breaking glass. The wedding dress wrapped itself around me tighter, the fabric seeming to fuse with my skin. "Welcome to the family," Emma said, her face appearing just inches from mine in the dark water. "You're going to love it here." That's when I heard the gunshot. The sound echoed across the water like thunder, and suddenly the hands holding me loosened their grip. I surfaced, gasping and choking, Jake's arms still around me. "Get out of there," someone shouted from the shore. "No." I turned and saw Sarah standing at the water's edge, holding what looked like an old hunting rifle. Her face was set in grim determination, and she was pointing the gun directly at the river wives. "They're not real bullets," she called to us, "but they're blessed with holy water and river salt. It'll hold them off long enough for you to get out." She fired again, and this time I saw the shot hit one of the older women directly in the chest. The woman didn't fall or bleed, but she flickered like a candle flame in the wind, becoming translucent for just a moment. The river wives were retreating now, backing away into the deeper water. Their beautiful, hypnotic facade was gone, replaced by something ancient and hungry and furious at being denied their prize. "You can't protect her forever," one of them hissed. "She's been marked. She'll come back." "Maybe," Sarah said, reloading the rifle. "But not tonight." Jake and I stumbled ashore, our clothes heavy with river water, both of us shaking uncontrollably. The wedding dress had disappeared, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. "How did you know?" I asked Sarah, my teeth chattering. "I didn't sleep," she said simply. "Haven't slept a full night since Rebecca disappeared. I keep watch, try to warn people when I can. I saw you heading for the water and figured I'd better intervene." She looked out at the river, where the lanterns were slowly dimming and the figures were fading back into the mist. "They'll be back," she said. "They always come back. But you've got maybe a few hours before they regroup." "A few hours for what?" Jake asked. "To pack your things and get the hell out of Millbrook Falls," Sarah said. "And don't ever come back." We didn't argue. We went back to the cottage, threw our belongings into suitcases without bothering to fold anything, and loaded up Jake's car. The whole time, I kept expecting to hear the singing start again, but the night remained quiet. As we drove out of town, I looked back once at the river glinting in the moonlight. For just a moment, I thought I saw figures standing in the water, watching us leave. But then we rounded a bend in the road, and Millbrook Falls disappeared behind us. We drove straight through until morning, not stopping until we reached the next state. Jake didn't ask me to explain what had happened, and I didn't try. Some things are too strange, too impossible to put into words. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear the singing, faint and distant, carried on the wind from some far-off river where women in wedding dresses stand in shallow water, washing stains that will never come clean. And sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I'd put on that beautiful white dress. Would I be happy now, free from all the worries and fears that still keep me awake at night? Would I have found the peace and sisterhood that Emma promised? I guess I'll never know. But every time I hear running water, every river, every stream, every babbling brook, I listen carefully for the sound of voices calling my name. Because Sarah was right about one thing. They said I was marked, and I don't think they've forgotten about me. Last week, Jake and I moved to Phoenix. It's a desert city, about as far from rivers and streams as you can get in this country. But even here, sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear singing in the distance. They're still out there in rivers and streams across the country, washing their eternal laundry and waiting for young women to answer their call. They're patient. They have all the time in the world. So if you ever find yourself in a small town by a river and you hear women singing in the early morning mist, do me a favor, turn around and walk away. Don't stop to take pictures, don't let curiosity get the better of you. And whatever you do, don't let them talk you into helping with their washing. Because once you touch that water, once you hear their full song, you'll never really leave. Trust me on this one. Some stains never wash out.